If you know the Goldburns, you know that the aria is a kind of false calm, a measured, beautiful lie about what is coming. The first variation breaks from it like a door swinging open. The music changes character, quickens, becomes intricate and architectural, and it keeps changing, variation by variation, Bach laying out a structure of 30 pieces that are each distinct in mood and tempo while being held together, invisibly, by the same bass line running beneath them all. It is music built like a cathedral. You don't hear the whole of it at once. You feel it. Agnes played from memory. She did not look at her hands. She watched some fixed point slightly above the keyboard, or perhaps nothing at all, and the music came out of her the way water comes out of a pipe that has been opened, not forced, not performed, simply released. The sixth variation, the slow, tender one in the minor key, caught the woman standing nearest to me by surprise. I watched her press her fingers to her mouth. She was not, I think, someone who cried easily. She looked embarrassed by herself and did not look away. Behind me, very quietly, a door opened. I turned. Two of the string players had come out of the rehearsal room at the end of the corridor. They were still holding their instruments, a violinist and a cellist, shoulder to shoulder in the doorway, standing absolutely still and listening. A third appeared behind them. The principal pianist of the orchestra came to stand beside me. He was a lean, formal man. I had photographed him, once, some years back, for a program, and he stood with his arms folded and watched Agnes with an expression I recognized. I'd seen it in my studio, over the years, when a subject did something that surprised even themselves. That expression of involuntary reckoning. I turned back to Lund. He had put the glass down. I don't know when. It was on the windowsill behind him and he was standing with his hands at his sides, and he was watching Agnes Thorne play the Goldberg variations on the Harrifield Steinway, and something in his posture had gone out of it, not the authority, exactly, but the performance of authority. What remained was just a man listening. He took one step toward the piano. Then stopped. Agnes played through the variations, not all 32, she had a different count, a natural one. She played as a person plays who has lived with a piece for a very long time and knows where to breathe inside it. There were variations she expanded, letting the ornaments settle and bloom before she moved on. There were others she moved through cleanly, with the kind of velocity that made you aware of Bach's underlying architecture the way you become aware of a building's bones when it shifts in wind. The canonic variations came and went, each one a small marvel of interlocking logic, the voices entering one behind the other, each answering the first, and you could hear, if you listened hard, that neither was leading and neither was following, they were simply inseparable, and then the quodlibet, the peasant song one, the playful one, which should by rights have felt frivolous and instead, heard here, felt like a gift. Like the piece was allowing itself to be joyful for a moment before coming home. The aria returned. The same 16 bars. The same melody. But different, the way a sentence you've read 100 pages later in a novel means more than it did on page 1, the same words carrying all the weight of what has come between. Agnes played it quieter than she had played it the first time. Much quieter. The foyer held its breath. The final chord. Agnes lifted her hands from the keys and set them in her lap. She sat very still. She looked at her hands. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then Victor Lund walked to the piano. He walked slowly, and the people nearest him made room without being asked. He came and stood beside the bench and looked down at Agnes, and she looked up at him, and whatever passed between them in that moment, I was close enough to see his face, and it was not the face of the man who had said give us something simple. It was the face of someone who had just been reminded, without mercy and without malice, of what music is actually for. He didn't speak. He pulled the bench gently away from the piano, and Agnes stood, and he sat down, and he played the opening bars of the aria himself. Just that, the first 4 bars, very slowly. Then he stopped and sat with his hands on the keys and said nothing. The room, which had been silent, went more silent. The orchestra's principal pianist, standing beside me, exhaled quietly and then said, under his breath, "Good Lord." That was the only thing anyone said for some time after. Agnes picked up the garment bag. She straightened the crease at the bottom with one thumb. She crossed toward the lift at the far end of the foyer, unhurried, the way she'd come in. She didn't look back. I found out later, not from Agnes, but from the duty manager, who mentioned it in passing, a week or so afterward, that she had studied at the Royal Conservatoire from the age of 15. That she had stopped, at 21, for reasons she kept to herself, and had not played in public in the intervening years. That the Harrowfield Steinway was tuned by the same and every March. That Agnes had a standing arrangement with him, had always had one, to have the basement piano room opened on Sunday mornings, before the hotel woke up. 22 years. Sunday mornings. The same instrument. I have taken portraits of prime ministers and poets, of generals and judges, of people who have spent their whole lives arranging their faces for examination. Some of those photographs are still in exhibitions. People stand in front of them and nod. But the photograph I think about, the one I wish I had taken and never will, is Victor Lund's face in the moment between the last chord ending and his first step toward the piano. 4 seconds, perhaps. The mineral water on the windowsill behind him. The string players in the doorway with their instruments. The whole of that foyer assembled around one note of reckoning. He had asked her to play something simple. She had played one of the most intricate and humane pieces of music the Western world has ever produced. I think he knew, walking to that piano, that he would be conducting the evening's concert in a few hours. I think he also knew, sitting down at the bench, that he would be conducting it differently. 40 years behind a lens. I know what it looks like when a face rearranges itself around a truth it has just been handed. That is what I saw. And I have never sat in that velvet chair by the east window the same way since. I have been attending the Harrowfield Spring Gala for 11 years running. 11 years of champagne I don't particularly want, of nodding along to opinions I don't particularly share, of sitting in that old velvet chair by the east window while the pre-concert crowd mills and brays around the grand piano nobody ever plays. The piano is a Steinway Concert Grand, a Model D, 9 feet of black lacquer and rosewood inlay that the hotel acquired sometime in the 1930s and has polished to a high, reproachful shine ever since. It sits there every year in the center of the foyer like a word nobody dares say out loud. I'm a retired photographer. Portraits, mostly. 40 years of watching faces and waiting for the thing behind them to surface. Old habit. Hard to stop. So I was watching, that April evening, when Agnes Thorne came through the service door. She would have been invisible to most of them. That was the job. She moved around the edges of the event, tidy and unhurried, the way long practice teaches you to go unnoticed. Agnes worked in alterations. Mending. She had a small room on the basement level where she kept her needles and her thread and her good lamp, and she had been doing this at the Harrowfield for 22 years. I knew her by sight. We'd exchanged a word or two in the lift, over the years. A quiet woman. Capable hands. The kind of face that has already decided nothing in the room will surprise it. She was carrying a garment bag, something formal, a lady's gown, newly rehemmed from the look of the neat crease at the bottom, and she was crossing the foyer to deliver it to one of the guest suites upstairs. She passed within a few feet of the Steinway. She didn't slow down. But she looked at it, the way you look at something you have known a very long time. He caught that look. Maestro Victor Lund was standing not 10 feet away with a group of the orchestra's principal players, holding a glass of mineral water and holding court. I had seen him conduct twice before. A considerable talent, I'll not take that from him. He had a gift for the grand gesture, on the podium and off it, the way his wrist described an arc during the climax of the second movement, the way his silence in rehearsal could press down on 40 musicians like a hand on a table. He carried himself with the comfortable authority of a man who has never once been asked to doubt his own instincts. He was the kind of man who fills a room, not by force, but by long habit of being its most important thing. Ah, he said. He said it loudly enough for the people nearest him to hear, and he tilted his head toward Agnes in that stagey, look at this way that the naturally theatrical deploy when they sense an audience. Our seamstress has an eye for the instrument. A few of the guests within earshot turned to look. Agnes had paused 3 feet from the Steinway's near corner. She was standing the way people stand when they are waiting to see whether they're required to respond to something. Well, Lund said, smiling with all his teeth, since you're standing there gaping at it, go on. Give us something simple. Don't hurt yourself. 3 or 4 of the principals laughed. Not cruelly, perhaps. The easy laughter of people in an orbit, laughing because the planet they circle is laughing and doing otherwise would cost something. The way people laugh when a man of that standing says a thing and laughing costs them nothing and silence might. A woman in blue beside Lund said, Victor, gently, the way you touch someone's elbow. He waved it off. Agnes looked at him. She looked at the piano. She crossed to it, set the garment bag flat on the floor against the piano's leg, and sat down. I remember thinking, she's going to play. She's actually going to play. And then, immediately after that, with the certainty that comes from 40 years of reading faces, she's done this before. The crowd near the piano didn't withdraw so much as rearrange itself around her. Not giving her space, they weren't yet sure she warranted space. They were simply present, the way people at a party stay near a thing that might become interesting. Lund had stopped talking. He was watching with a kind of entertained patience, the glass still raised. What happened next happened very slowly, the way important things do. She reached under the bench and turned the height knob. Not fumbling for it, she found it first try, the way a person finds a thing they have found 10,000 times before. 2 turns. Then she straightened, placed her hands flat in her lap, and was still for perhaps 4 seconds. Not nervous. Not gathering herself. Something else. As though she were listening for something that was already there. She put her hands on the keys. The first note of the Goldberg variations is a single note on its own, a quiet G, and Agnes Thorne played it so gently that the nearest guests didn't register it as the beginning of something. They heard a sound. Then the aria began, Bach's aria, the long, ornamented, heartbreaking melody of it, the left hand moving in that slow, stately walking pattern, the right hand doing the thing that no description quite captures, which is falling and rising at once, phrase by phrase, like a question that already contains its answer. The foyer did not stop all at once. It stopped the way a room does when something is happening that is more serious than the room was prepared for. One person stops talking. Then another hears the first person stop and hears why. Then the circle widens. A waiter stalled with a tray. A man in a dinner jacket who had been laughing about something abruptly found he could not remember what. It took perhaps 40 seconds, the length of time it took the aria's opening phrase to make its way around the room like a hand touching each person on the shoulder. Then it was quiet in that foyer in a way it had not been quiet since the carpet was laid. I watched Lund's face. He had not moved. The mineral water was still in his hand. His smile had not collapsed, it had simply become insufficient for the situation and was gradually being replaced by something else, something that didn't have a polite name in that room and that he was working, you could see, to master. The aria finished. 16 bars, stately and complete. Agnes went straight into the variations.